Hi, Misha here, and last time in the first video it was an overview, and now we're gonna have the first up close look at two closely related designs. The first issue in the Discovery Eagle Moss collection, USS Shenzhou, Walker-class, and actually issue 3, although originally it was to be 4, the USS Kerala of the Shepard-class. Also, the Uss Gagarin was a member of this class. And yeah, as you can tell, they're quite similar. So, as promised, we'll talk about the in-universe and then the real world, and we'll compare with previous Starfleet ships from TOS, Enterprise, and so on, to see if these can at all be fitted into the fleet. Alright, we have the Shenzhou on the spinny thing, and this is actually the first ship we see in Discovery. It is a member of the Walker class, named after Joe Walker, who was a pilot in the employ of NASA. And that's how most of these vessels will be named, for test pilots. The creators and designers, including John Eaves, seem to really have been inspired by the X-planes, X-1, X-3, the Stiletto, and, X-15, and so on and so forth. And they were crazy plane designs that really never were intended for supermass production, just a half dozen at most, but would push the envelope for actual production planes later. Anywho, the ship is meant to be an advancement on the NX class, the original Enterprise, but by the time of Discovery, this is supposed to be an aging design, really out of date, but still serviceable enough. So it's not meant to be the cutting edge of technology. The design is early 23rd century, and the pilot ship, the class ship USS Walker, was in service by 2220, give or take. And we know that by 2249, the Shenzhou here is considered old and dependable, but, well, obsolete. Much like the Stargazer was in the Next Generation, based on Picard. So I'm going to try to move you here just a bit. But in Next Generation, Picard's Stargazer was considered pretty dated by the standards of the 2350s, but still dependable. And it was an exploration cruiser, much as the Walker here. It's considered a light cruiser, exploration craft, and survey craft. And since it is prominently featured in the season 1, especially the first couple episodes, we do know a decent amount about it. For example, we know that it has 13 decks, a crew of roughly 150, a top speed of roughly warp 6. It's armed with phase cannons, not phasers, which is kind of a neat callback to the Enterprise in X-01. But it does have shields. It does have photon torpedoes, at least 2 tubes. It does have at least 2 shuttle bays. And pretty much otherwise standard Federation stuff. The place that Discovery ships kind of lose it for a lot of people is the length. This on paper is 423 meters. Keep in mind the original Constitution was between 274 and 300 meters, depending on the source and when and who you asked, because it was never laid down back then. Either way, much bigger. And the NX-01 Enterprise was 225 meters. Meaning this would be nearly double the length. But what I kind of find useful, and the numbers really do work out. If you take the stated length and divide it by 2/3, 66%, you get more reasonable numbers for these ships. That gets this one down to about 282 meters. So a little bit shorter than the Constitution, at least by most numbers, and still comfortably larger and longer than the NX. And the NX had 7 decks. This has 13. That works. The NX had a crew of 80 to 100. So yeah, that really does seem to work out. And throughout this little series of videos, you'll see time and time again that it does work out. But yeah, with this Shenzhou is an older ship. By the way, Shenzhou is named after the Chinese space program. Some translate it as divine vessel. A heavenly vessel might be a more apt translation. But either way, that's what it's named for. And it's the only ship of the class we see. And for what it's worth, it's NCC 1227. Although I don't really subscribe to the notion that the registry numbers are 100% sequential. That doesn't seem to pan out. And I don't just mean for Discovery, but I mean even looking at TOS or the TMP eras, not to mention Next Generation. And of course, this is in use and is there at the Battle of the Binary Stars. Basically starts the battle and is the first ship to be fired upon. And while it does hold out, it ends up being abandoned. And it's actually thanks to the Shenzhou that the sarcophagus ship gets back up and running when they take its dilithium processor. But that's essentially the end of its story. So, taking it off the stand, what about the design? Well, we do have a pretty typical saucer, and the way it's curved is pretty NX style, but more streamlined, sleeker. Kind of filling in the back here. We have these kind of ridges that are a bit reminiscent of the pontoons. And you'll notice we do have a deflector on the top edge. This is kind of Discovery's nod towards the TOS deflector dish. It is a dish, but it has 2 prongs, sometimes called the heavy deflector. And I kind of like it. It's different, but recognizable. And it actually fits in universe okay, because we see some ships considered a little more primitive than the Constitution. For example, the Class J freighter, or that one ship from the JJ universe that have 2 small deflectors instead of 1 large one. It seems like maybe they kind of went through a phase of 2 small deflectors and then combining those into 1 deflector with 2 prongs, and then later 1 prong, kind of progressing forward. But of course there's not a bridge there. As is famously known, this class has the bridge on the underside. This is said to have been done for survey missions, planetary observation work. And this ship, while I don't think it could land, it can fly through an atmosphere, so that would make sense. But I think it was just done for difference's sake, and that's okay, frankly, in my opinion. It's okay to be different. And then we have an interesting secondary hull system here. We've got pylons sweeping back with these kind of spikes on them. I'm not actually sure what the spikes do. They are a little bit reminiscent of the Enterprise era, though, I have to admit. I can't exactly say why, but they do. And then we have what I think of as kind of this bridge. It's not exactly a secondary hull. It's more of a support system, connective system between the 2 nacelles. And actually, I really like this bridge part. This looks sufficiently more advanced than what we see on the NX, but also clunkier than the Constitution. So I actually like this setup for this vessel. and I don't mind the saucer or the bottom bridge. Where this design falls down a bit for me, the nacelles. We don't see any other ships really that I can think of in Discovery that have this exact style of nacelle, which is good considering this is supposed to be an older ship. But it's also not good because these look pretty advanced even compared to the other Discovery nacelles. They look very... Honestly, they remind me, they're not the same, but they remind me of the Excelsior's nacelles because they're TMP-esque, but they're more rounded. That's where this ship kind of lets me down, is the nacelles. I think kind of doing NX style nacelles or something, a blend between NX and TOS for this ship, since it is supposed to be older, would have been a neat nod. So everything else about it I kind of enjoy, but the nacelles do kind of dip down a bit for me. Oh well. Moving on, we have the Uss Kerala, named after the Indian space program. Yes, India does have a space program. And this is part of the Shepard-class, named after Alan Shepard, first American in space, or at least first American in suborbital flight, although John Glenn was the first to truly orbit. Shepard's first flight was only 15 minutes, and he actually kind of got the short end of the stick. After that, he was grounded for many years because of a health issue, but finally he was cleared to fly again in the early 70s and would command Apollo 14, the last of kind of the short duration moon missions, but considering only 12 men walked on the moon, pretty elite club to be in. And like I said, another member of this class was the Uss Gagarin, obviously named after Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, Russian or Soviet if you prefer, and he actually did orbit the Earth. So his flight, unlike Shepard's being 15 minutes, was a full 90 minutes plus, because he made one full orbit. Very interesting, those early Soviet space programs. And we see, or at least hear of a few others, including the USS Ride and the USS Curie. Now, if this design looks similar to the Shenzhou, the Walker, that's because it was initially meant to be, it was one of the concepts that could have been the Shenzhou. But of course, they ended up going with what we had. Then they considered making the USS Glenn, the Discovery's sister ship, this class. But again, it was not. Instead, they went with another crossfield, which I frankly agree with. It works better. Instead, the USS Curie here, the USS Kerala, was at the Battle of the Binary Stars, and it was one of the few that actually survived. The USS Gagarin, seen later in Season 1, was not so fortunate. It didn't hang long with some Klingons, but it gave a good fight. We don't know a whole lot about this because once it wasn't selected for the Shenzhou's design, it was a background ship. Its stated length is 505 meters. Adjusting that down, we get 337 meters. And considering a lot of that length would be the nacelles, I'm okay with that. That seems to work and fit in fine with the Connie we know and love. And that's really about it. It's often said that this was a warp test system. I mean, if they needed to try out a new warp drive, they might use the Shepard-class for that. If we do think the registries are somehow connected or sequential, the ships in this class have registries only slightly higher than the Shenzhou in the 1200s and bleeding over into the beginning of the 1300s. So it does seem like that in service this was the direct replacement as a light exploration cruiser for the Walker. And yeah, the design pops up now and again. As I said, this was issue 3 from Eaglemoss, but originally it was meant to be 4. 3 was going to be a Klingon ship, but it got delayed or something, so this got pushed to 3. And I think it's good they did this ship, but it's so similar to the Walker that it might have seemed a little bit of a cop-out at the time with so many ships to kind of do 2 so similar, but oh well. Taking this off the stand, the model itself is a little heavier than the Walker. It gets a more blended hull, more streamlined. We have dual pylons for each nacelle, but they're both swept. And the nacelles kind of cant upwards versus downwards on the Walker. Both are fine. We see Starfleet ships doing both styles. The bridge is on the top, more traditional position on this one. Flipping it over, we have a period style deflector on the underside now, and we have this secondary hull bulge kind of blended in to the main hull. So a little bit more evidence of a drive section there. Looking at it, it has less of an NX style saucer and more of a TOS style. And we have pretty much Discovery style nacelles. They kind of square off. And as we go through these, you'll see this pattern over and over. Sometimes medium length, sometimes short, sometimes long. And this is the longer style. And this is very close to what is on the Discovery herself. We can almost say that the warp system was first tried out on the Shepard-class. Yeah, but it has kind of this section back here that bulges up, comes down. It definitely effectively comes across as a more advanced version of the Walker class. So with that, let's get to some comparing. And since these are really inspired and meant to kind of be a follow-on to it, we really have to look at the NX class from Enterprise. It has, of course, the deflector at the front of the saucer. We have these very pronounced pontoons. We don't really have a secondary hull or engineering section split apart. We have cylindrical style nacelles with upswept pylons. You know the NX class. I really like it. Frankly, it's quite neat. And I think the Shenzhou really does, embody that spirit, as does the later Kerala, the Shepard. This does look more primitive than those. Now, comparing it to the later Constitution, well, we have to just face some realities that even the NX, in some ways, looks more advanced than the 1960s Constitution. And I'm going to do a very long episode looking at the Connie herself, so we'll save that till then. But I do have some thoughts and some quotes from Roddenberry and Matt Jeffries to try to contextualize this a wee bit. So yeah, this is mid-22nd century, and this is an early 23rd, and this is a mid-23rd. What about a late 22nd century? While we don't have something 100% canon, we do have this design here. And, I think it's kind of interesting in between. This is the Bonaventure concept model from Eaglemoss. It has appeared in some calendars and publications and fleet charts, and it may be in Star Trek Online now, but it was meant to kind of blend NX to the Constitution, be a transitional model. And looking at this, it really does kind of compare favorably with the Shenzhou. We have the front deflector. We have the bridge on top, but we have kind of this engineering section blended with the saucer, which is what we see especially on the Shepard. We have slightly swept pylons. And here we have round nacelles. And again, I would have liked to have seen nacelles like these or similar to them on the Walker class on the Shenzhou. But this actually fills that gap in between the two really quite well. You know, we just don't see, especially in TOS, many Federation ships, and those we see are all Constitutions. Of course, the real-world explanation was they didn't have the budget. Of course, in Universe, they say that those are Starships, but they have other secondary ships, and TOS Remastered did give us a few. That Class J freighter is one. And here's another, the Antares class. This was in Charlie X. It goes to show you, and it's canon, because it's TOS Remastered is canon, that not everything was Constitution shaped. Far from it. Very different. And while this was a new design for TOS Remastered, it was based off a automated ship from TAS, the animated series. So it's not completely dreamed up with its creative, blocky shapes. Imagine if the Shenzhou looked like this. The reason I decided to bring it out, even though there's not a kind of a design similarity, it's a survey ship as well as a freighter and everything else, just kind of secondary ship. And much like the Shenzhou, it's said to be an old design. So here we have ships that might have been contemporary or even older than the Walker. Yeah. So with that, let's move forward in time. I could easily point out some similarities to some TMP era ships like the Miranda, or really the Centaur, but I actually want to talk about those in a different video. So let's just move on to TNG. And this one kind of caught my eye. We don't really know much about this class. This is the Springfield Class from the Best of Both Worlds graveyard scene. The New Orleans class also kind of reminds me, but I don't know, something about it harkens. Maybe it's just the odd structure and slung back nacelles. I could definitely see this being a survey ship, cruiser type in Starfleet, a spiritual successor to the Walker or Shepard. I don't know. It was nearby. And again, something just a little bit reminds me. I think it's because it does have very long nacelles, especially for the TNG era. And it does have a odd placement for the deflector. But like I said, the Walker was often used as a survey ship, meaning that really its most relevant successor is this, the Nova class. A fan favorite, myself included. I see a lot of similarities here. We have swept back nacelles, blocky nacelles. This one has the bridge on top, but it is kind of an interesting bridge style. And we have this very prominent cutout in the front for a deflector. Of course, we have a Voyager-esque deflector there. I'm not saying it's a future-revised version of, but this was used as a planetary survey and science ship. And one can imagine it was a far future successor in the lineage of science ships to these two. And I don't know, I can kind of believe that. And who doesn't like to see the good old Nova from time to time? So with that, let's wrap this here video up. So where do these designs fit? I do think they do work pretty good as future ships in the fleet that had the NX and her sister ships. And honestly, I do think that they fit okay in with the TMP era fleet. Where we run into problems, and we will throughout all these videos, is the TOS era. And I think a lot of people think of the TOS era as all this information, all these different ships, not just the Constitution, but the Ptolemy and the Saladin and the Hermes and the Federation, even the Daedalus. None of those existed in actual TOS. And virtually none of them were canonized except for the Daedalus, but even it only on panels, not even on live action. The TOS era aesthetic was only the Constitution, and from that other designs were extrapolated because, you know, people wanted to have FASA, they wanted to have Starfleet battles. You can't just have one ship type. We saw the same thing with the Romulans and the Klingons. We only had the one Romulan, well, really two Romulan ships, but one of them was just a repurposed Klingon. And only one Klingon ship. From that, a whole lineage was created for each race. But on screen, we don't know how the Connie would have compared. Maybe the rest of the fleet did look like it. Maybe it was the oddity. So I just want to say that. And of course these are CGI, whereas that was a physical model that always makes changes. And you are just going to have more modern looking designs. It's inevitable. I actually really think they did a good job with the Walker, except for these nacelles. That really, I don't know. I don't so much mind the nacelles on the Shepard, because they kind of get established as the Discovery style, be they short, medium, or long. And while they don't really mesh well with the round TOS Connie nacelles, they work pretty good with the TMP Connie nacelles. Just my thoughts. I definitely like the overall shape of the Shepard-class. And I do like, sorry about that, and I do like the dual pylons here. One more or less straight, one curved. Goes to show you about the level of technology at the time. And I actually really like that bridge under the Shenzhou here, that little bridge section. It is pleasantly clunky and old style. And as we know too, this, just to say it in the video, this has the lateral vector transporters. What does that mean? We don't know, but they are supposed to mean old, just like phase cannons. It's said that in universe they take out more power. A few other ships in the fleet have them too, but they do tend to be older ships. So we do see some kind of leftover Enterprise era technology in the Shenzhou. Keep in mind that when the Cage was filmed, which took place in 2254, the Enterprise was said to have lasers still. So it does seem like they were having a particle beam or energy weapon upgrade in the mid-2250s, because it wasn't long after the Enterprise was said to have phasers. Of course, the real-world explanation is laser sounded a lot cooler in 1964 than it did in 1966. I do not mind having phase cannons in Enterprise, but I do wish they had made them a little different. They basically were phasers, but with a different name. I wish they'd made them physically and effectively different devices, but that's not a problem for Discovery. That was kind of an issue with Enterprise, but I digress. First ships and the Eagle Moss models themselves are actually quite very nice. Both fit on the stands well. And like most Federation ships, the saucer is metal, with the nacelles being plastic. Anyway, I think that's enough for now, but I'll do another one soon. Hope people enjoy these, and I'll probably do an actual black box talking about Discovery as a series itself. This is just looking at ship designs, because I was curious. With that, if you could, please like, share, subscribe. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.